In the summer of 1971, carpenters restoring an old probate room in Charleston found a packet of sealed papers hidden behind a false wall panel. Most of them were ordinary: estate inventories, debt notices, routine petitions. One was not. It recorded a request so explosive, the clerk who heard it never copied it into the official ledger. In June of 1846, a 27-year-old widow from one of the richest rice families in South Carolina walked into probate and asked for something the law itself had no honest way to permit. She wanted one of her late husband's slaves not only freed, but written into the estate. Not as property to be transferred, not as a servant to be reassigned, as a beneficiary. In Charleston, that did not sound like grief. It sounded like evidence. The widow's name was Lenora Vale. Her husband, Augustus Vale, had died only 16 days earlier at Blackwater House, the family's rice estate upriver from the city, where the marsh opened wide and the tide moved through the fields like breathing. Augustus had been 51, wealthy, politically connected, and very sure of his place in the world. Lenora was 27, childless, recently widowed, and by every outward standard expected to behave in a way the city would recognize: mourning black, quiet composure, a public face of loss, then obedience to whatever arrangement the family considered proper. Instead, she summoned the family attorney, placed both gloved hands on his desk, and insisted that a man named Isaiah Cole be removed from the estate and provided for. That demand alone would have been enough to start whispers, but the surviving deposition made the whisper darker. According to the clerk's hidden copy, Lenora did not speak of Isaiah like a servant whose faithful work deserved reward. She spoke like a woman racing a clock. She said delay would place him in immediate danger. She said there were promises made at Blackwater House that the Vale family would now deny. And when the attorney warned her that even making such a request could destroy her reputation, she answered with a line the clerk underlined twice: "Reputation is the least expensive thing they intend to take from me." That is where the official story should have begun. It did not. In the official record, Augustus Vale died of apoplexy after supper. His widow passed through a period of nervous instability, and an enslaved man named Isaiah Cole later attempted to flee, failed, and died by his own hand in the marsh. Case closed. But the hidden papers found in 1971 suggested something else entirely. They suggested that Blackwater House contained a relationship Charleston society could not allow, a death the family could not afford to examine too closely, and a second man whose knowledge had become dangerous enough that entire branches of the record had to disappear. What follows comes from the concealed probate copy, a maid's journal never entered into evidence, private letters, fragments of a physician's correspondence, and a diary that surfaced only after another person vanished while trying to tell the story. Because once you start reading the Blackwater papers, one thing becomes hard to ignore. Lenora Vale was not acting like a grieving widow who had lost her judgment. She was acting like someone who understood exactly what had happened at Blackwater House, and exactly what would happen next if Isaiah Cole remained there. Blackwater House stood roughly 8 miles outside Charleston, on a rise above the rice flats, a broad, pale mansion with deep verandas, shuttered windows, and a long carriage lane lined with live oaks so old their roots lifted the earth. From the river, it looked like order. From inside the recovered papers, it looked like strain. Household inventories listed Isaiah Cole as a domestic servant, but he was not treated like the others recorded on the same pages. His valuation was unusually high. He was housed not in the distant quarters, but in a room above the carriage building linked to the main house by a covered walkway. Account books showed expenditures for tailored coats, writing paper, books, and repeated visits from the same physician who treated the Vale family themselves. That alone would have been enough to mark him as unusual. The journal of Ruth Darby, Lenora's personal maid, made him impossible to read as ordinary. Ruth wrote that Augustus was often absent in Charleston or Georgetown, tending to business, politics, or whatever pleasures men like him never bothered to describe in writing. During those absences, she said, the house changed. Lenora stopped performing the role of decorative wife and became something sharper, more awake. She spent long afternoons in the West Library with Isaiah. The shutters half closed against the heat, a fan moving slowly, books open between them. Ruth never claimed to witness anything physical. What unsettled her was something else. Conversation. She wrote that Lenora spoke to Isaiah as if she had finally found someone inside Blackwater who could answer her in full sentences. He read history. He knew scripture beyond memorized fragments. He could discuss shipping routes, poetry, and law with enough precision that Ruth, who heard pieces through the door, began to understand why Augustus had first prized him and later feared him. That fear appears more clearly in an entry dated December 1845. Ruth recorded a violent argument in the upstairs hall. Augustus had discovered that Lenora and Isaiah had again been reading together after dark. His exact words are lost, but Ruth wrote that he threatened to send coal down to Louisiana before the month was out. In the plantation world of the 1840s, that was not a threat of relocation. It was a threat of destruction. A transfer south to the sugar parishes could mean labor so brutal it amounted to a prolonged sentence. Lenora's answer, Ruth wrote, came out in a voice she had never heard before. Then this house will become your grave before he reaches the river. That line would sound melodramatic if it stood alone. It does not. Because another document, a letter from Dr. Elias Pembroke to a colleague in Philadelphia, turned the tension at Blackwater into something far more dangerous. Pembroke wrote that he had examined Mrs. V in October of 1845 and found signs of pregnancy approximately 3 to 4 months advanced. He also noted, with obvious discomfort, that Augustus Vale had been absent from Blackwater for much of that period, except for one brief visit. He did not spell out the conclusion. He did not need to. If his timing was correct, Augustus could not have been the father, and in the closed world of Blackwater House, there were not many men Lenora would have encountered in private, repeatedly, and with enough trust to make the possibility conceivable. The child never lived. Ruth's journal records that Lenora miscarried in November, while Augustus was again away. The only people present at the worst of it were Ruth herself and Isaiah, who fetched the doctor after Lenora had already begun hemorrhaging. Ruth wrote that Isaiah came back with blood on his cuffs, ash white in the face, and would not let anyone remove the ruined linen until the doctor had seen her. Augustus was never told about the pregnancy, or, if he learned of it later, nothing in the official papers admits it. That concealed loss changes everything that followed. A widow trying to free a trusted servant is one kind of scandal. A widow trying to save the man who may have fathered her dead child is another. And yet, even that may not explain the urgency in Lenora's probate request. For that, we have to look at what she tried to do after the first attorney refused her. Within 2 weeks, she dismissed the family lawyer and hired Henry Northam, a Massachusetts-born attorney recently settled in Charleston, a man already viewed with suspicion for his northern connections and technical reading of property law. Northam's notes survive in fragment form, and they reveal a plan that was reckless, brilliant, and very nearly workable. Lenora would sell Isaiah to Northam for a nominal sum. Northam would take him north by ship. There, under the protection of another jurisdiction, he would be manumitted. A trust, funded through assets quietly removed from Lenora's widow's share, would support him once free. It was not justice. It was legal evasion dressed as procedure. But in a slave society, procedure was often the only language available to people trying to do the impossible. And Lenora was willing to gamble her standing, her property, and very likely her safety to make that happen. Which raises the question the city would never have asked honestly. What did Isaiah Cole mean to her? The papers suggest 3 answers, each more dangerous than the last. He was the man she loved. He was the father of the child she lost. And he may have known what really happened on the night Augustus Vale died. Augustus Vale's brother, Thaddeus, intervened before Northam's plan could move. The challenge he filed in Chancery was elegant in the way cruel things often are. He did not accuse Lenora of adultery. He did not accuse her of fraud. He accused her of instability. He argued that grief had rendered her vulnerable to improper influence, and that no court should permit a young widow in such a state to dispose of estate property, move funds, or alter the social order out of emotional confusion. The language was polished. The purpose was blunt. Stop her. Contain him. Take control of everything. The court responded exactly as a respectable court in South Carolina was expected to respond. An injunction was issued. No major assets could be sold. No trust could be moved out of state. No enslaved person connected to the Vale estate could be transferred. A guardian examiner was appointed to assess Lenora's mental condition. His report still survives. He found her lucid, informed, capable of discussing business and household affairs with precision. But he also noted, with unmistakable disapproval, that she insisted Isaiah remain present during each interview. That detail mattered more than any medical finding. A woman who trusted an enslaved man more than her husband's brother was not, in that world, interpreted as loyal. She was interpreted as corrupted. The examiner stopped short of declaring her incompetent. He did something more useful to the family. He recommended oversight. The court then appointed Thaddeus as co-administrator of Blackwater. Lenora would remain in the house. She would receive an allowance. She would be treated with formal respect. And she would control almost nothing. It was a bloodless coup staged under the banner of concern. Then Isaiah disappeared. On the morning of July 22nd, 1846, his room above the carriage building was found empty. A lamp had burned low on the table. A book lay open. His coat was gone. So was a packet of papers Northam had prepared, but never filed. Thaddeus immediately declared that Lenora had arranged an escape. Lenora denied it. Witness statements say she looked not defiant, but terrified. She reportedly offered money from her private allowance for any information that would bring Isaiah back alive. Searchers went out that same day with dogs and lanterns. 3 days later, they returned with the kind of explanation powerful men prefer because it arrives already solved. Isaiah Cole had been found hanging from a cedar limb at the edge of the marsh. The official report concluded that he fled, became trapped, and killed himself rather than face capture and punishment. No inquest worth the name followed. No second theory was entertained. His body was buried in an unmarked patch of ground beyond the formal cemetery boundary. Blackwater kept moving. Rice still had to be processed. Accounts still had to be settled. Respectability still had to be maintained. Lenora, however, broke in a way the official story could not smooth over. Ruth Darby wrote that when the news was brought upstairs, Lenora did not scream. She folded. Not dramatically, not theatrically, as if the center of her body had simply given way. For days, she remained confined to bed under heavy tinctures. When she finally spoke again, Ruth recorded one sentence. "They killed him because he knew too much." That line would be chilling under any circumstances. Another journal entry made it worse. More than a month before Isaiah vanished, Ruth wrote that he had become convinced Augustus did not die naturally. He had seen something at the final dinner, or shortly after it. He never fully explained. He only told Ruth that if the truth came out, Blackwater House would not survive it. Now the story stopped being only about forbidden attachment. It became a story about motive. If Isaiah knew Lenora was pregnant by him, that was a scandal. If he knew Augustus planned to sell him south, that was a crisis. If he also knew Augustus Vale had not died of apoplexy at all, that was a threat no powerful family would tolerate lightly. And from that point forward, every subsequent event begins to look less like misfortune and more like management. The troublesome man is dead. The widow is isolated. The northern lawyer is sidelined. The brother takes control. The record becomes tidy. For 15 years, Blackwater House lived under that tidy version. Lenora remained there, paler each year, receiving almost no visitors except, occasionally, Henry Northam, who continued to bring her books and leave with nothing anyone could prove. The Vale family prospered. Augustus kept his place in public memory. Isaiah disappeared from it. If the story ended there, it would already be ugly enough. But it did not end there, because Lenora kept writing, and because more than a century later, another woman started pulling at the threads the family had spent decades knotting shut. In 1972, a graduate researcher named Nora Bell came to Charleston to study women's property rights in the antebellum South. What drew her into the Blackwater case is easy to understand. At first glance, it looked like a legal curiosity. A widow, a sanity challenge, an impossible inheritance request, a missing set of papers. But the deeper Bell went, the stranger the pattern became. She found the hidden probate copy. She traced Northam's letters. She located references to Ruth Darby's journal in a private collection not cataloged in any public archive. Most unsettling of all, she became convinced the official file had been pared down on purpose. The gaps were too convenient. Mentions of Isaiah disappeared exactly where details should have sharpened. A physician's references were summarized, but not preserved. Cross-index pages had been torn out. Bell told a friend by phone that it was as if someone had not merely forgotten the case. Someone had curated its silence. Then Bell drove out toward the former Blackwater property and vanished. Her car was found near an old service road leading into the marsh preserve that now covers much of the former estate. There were no signs of violence, no clear sign of flight, no body. Authorities called it an accident. Heat, disorientation, mud, water, bad luck. Her advisor, Dr. Martin Keene, traveled south to collect her notes. When he asked to see the probate materials Bell had been studying, county staff told him no such documents existed. The hidden packet the Carpenters found the year before? No official record of that either. Just like that, the case nearly disappeared again. Nearly. Because in the spring of 1973, Keene received an unmarked parcel, postmarked from Charleston. Inside was a small, smoke-darkened diary, its leather warped by age and heat. A note, unsigned, said only this: "She gave it to my grandfather the day before the fire. he was told to keep it from the family. The diary covered the final years of Lenora Vale's life, and while it did not answer every question, it changed the entire shape of the story. The early entries are controlled, almost cautious. Weather, household rhythms, health, visitors. Then, slowly, Lenora began to say things no woman of her station could ever have admitted publicly. One entry mourned, "the child who had no lawful place in this world." Another described Isaiah not as a servant, not even as an ally, but as the one soul in that house before whom I was not performing. That alone would have confirmed the emotional core of the scandal. The more important entries dealt with Augustus. Lenora wrote that on the final night, Augustus had been suspicious, angry, and freshly aware that Isaiah had been corresponding with a northern contact. That line matters, because it suggests Isaiah had already been planning escape, not vaguely, not romantically, practically. If Augustus discovered those letters, he would have had reason to act immediately. Sell himself. Separate him from Lenora. End whatever had formed between them. Lenora's diary then makes the story darker and more complicated at the same time. She insists she did not poison her husband. She writes, "My hand steadied him, but it was not my hand that doomed him." That sentence clears her, perhaps. It does not clear Isaiah. Nor does it clear Thaddeus, nor anyone else at that table. And that is where the Blackwater case becomes truly dangerous. The diary does not give us a courtroom confession. It gives us a field of live possibilities. Isaiah may have acted first after learning he would be sold. Thaddeus may have seen advantage in his brother's sudden death. Lenora may have known less than everyone later claimed, or more. What the diary does make unmistakable is this. After Augustus died, the family's primary goal was not mourning. It was containment. Lenora wrote repeatedly that Thaddeus questioned her about the dinner years later. That his son Julian, after inheriting control, became fixated on the East Wing where she kept her papers. That she feared the family less for what they had done than for what they still believed they needed to do. That fear proved justified. The last entry in Lenora Vale's diary was dated November 9th, 1861. She wrote that Julian Vale had visited unexpectedly. He asked about Isaiah by name. He examined the locks on her writing desk. He lingered in her bedchamber far too long, under the excuse of checking storm damage from the previous week. Then Lenora wrote a line so cold, it still reads like a warning flung forward in time. If they search this room again, they will not come for paper. They will come for ending. 2 nights later, fire broke out in the East Wing of Blackwater House. Servants managed to stop the spread before the whole structure went, but Lenora did not escape. The official finding was smoke inhalation. No foul play suspected. Another clean ending. Except the diary had already been removed. Except the family never admitted it existed. Except Julian's interest in her room came immediately before the fire. Except every surviving piece of evidence points in the same direction. Whenever truth at Blackwater threatened to become legible, something happened to the person holding it. Isaiah died before he could leave the estate. Lenora died before she could speak publicly. Nora Bell vanished after tracing the suppressed record. Keene received the diary and, according to colleagues, spent the rest of his career refusing interviews about the case. Even the land remained guarded. The Blackwater site changed hands, then passed into a private marsh preserve, whose trustees repeatedly denied survey access to independent historians. In 2008, a group of trespassers claimed they found a crude stone near the old carriage road with a single carved letter. I. No official excavation followed. No official confirmation. No official interest. That, more than any ghost story told around Charleston, may be the true afterlife of Blackwater House. Not haunting. Suppression. The official version leaves Augustus Vale intact, a respected planter dead of natural causes. It leaves Lenora diminished, an unstable widow ruined by grief. And it leaves Isaiah Cole where the system always wanted him. Outside the record, outside the graveyard, outside the category of a man whose loss would require explanation. But the hidden papers resist that design. They tell us Lenora tried to do something no respectable woman in her position would do, unless the stakes were unbearable. She tried to get Isaiah out. Not later, not eventually, immediately. They tell us Isaiah was educated, trusted, loved, threatened, and then removed. They tell us a dead child stood at the center of the silence. They tell us Augustus Vale's death may have been the first crime in the story, not the fixed point around which the others were organized. And they tell us the family understood something institutions often understand very well. If you cannot make a truth disappear completely, you can still break its chain of proof. You can hide the clerk's copy. You can bury the body without a name. You can call a widow unstable. You can let a fire finish what law and reputation began. What you cannot fully control is the moment someone reads the fragments together. Then the shape appears. A young widow in the slave South tried to put an enslaved man's name into the estate because he was not, to her, an asset. He was the man she loved, the father of the child she lost, and very possibly the only surviving witness to how Augustus Vale really died. That is why the request in probate mattered so much. It was never just a legal anomaly. It was the first visible crack in a cover-up. And maybe the most devastating part of the Blackwater story is how neatly official memory divided the dead. Augustus got the stone. Lenora got the family plot. Isaiah may not have gotten a marked grave at all. One man memorialized, one woman contained, one man erased. Yet the whole machinery built to erase him failed in one important way. Because the most revealing document in the case is still not Augustus's death notice, or Thaddeus's petition, or any court order stamped and indexed. It is Lenora's impossible request. Write his name into the estate. That sentence crossed every line her world was built to defend. Race, property, inheritance, respectability, power. And more than a century later, it still tells us what Blackwater House was really protecting. Not grief, not order, not law. A secret so human, the system could survive only by calling it madness. That is why the story keeps returning. Not because old houses are eerie, not because the marsh produces legends, not because people enjoy scandal at a safe historical distance. It returns because buried inside this case is a truth larger than one family. Systems built on ownership are always terrified of evidence that the owned were loved, chosen, listened to, or treated as fully human by the people those systems trained to command them. Such evidence does not just complicate the record, it indicts the whole arrangement. And so, Blackwater House did what powerful worlds always do when a truth threatens the logic underneath them. It tried to bury the name. It buried the man instead. But not completely. Not forever.